There is a particular kind of silence that settles into a house when a woman has been told in her own kitchen that she does not belong there. It is not the silence of agreement. It is not the silence of defeat. It is the silence of someone who has just finished counting, who has written the final number in a column she has been tallying for a very long time, and who has closed the book. Evelyn Monroe was 71 years old, and she had mastered that silence the way some women master French or watercolor or the art of folding a fitted sheet. She had learned it in 43 years of marriage to a man who built things, first buildings, then a company, then a quiet fortune that nobody in her family ever thought to look for, because Evelyn drove a 12-year-old Honda Accord and bought her blouses at Marshall's and never once in her life ordered the expensive wine. Her husband, James Monroe, had died 3 years ago, sitting in his favorite recliner with a cup of decaf and the crossword puzzle folded to 17 across. The paramedics said it was likely instant. The coroner confirmed it. Evelyn had held his cooling hand for 11 minutes before she called anyone, because she wanted that last conversation to be between the two of them, even if only one of them could hear it. "I'll handle everything," she had whispered. The way we discussed. And she had. What Evelyn had not anticipated, what no amount of planning or patience could have fully prepared her for, was what would happen after the funeral flowers dried and the casseroles stopped arriving and the family settled back into the shape it had always wanted to be, which was a shape that did not include a 71-year-old woman who cooked too slowly, watched the news too loudly, and had the audacity to still be alive when her husband was not. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Linda's Life Diaries, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. Evelyn had one daughter. Nicole Monroe Ashford was 44 years old, a senior account director at a mid-sized advertising firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. She was the kind of woman who arrived at every event 7 minutes early, whose emails were answered within the hour, and whose house smelled of the candles she ordered by subscription, bergamot in the spring, cedar in the fall, something vaguely French in December. She had inherited her father's jaw and her mother's eyes, but she had developed, somewhere along the way, a particular talent that belonged to neither parent, the ability to make generosity feel like a transaction and obligation feel like a favor. She had married Derek Ashford 11 years ago. Derek was 46, a regional sales director for a commercial roofing company. He was a big man, not fat but substantial, with the build of someone who had played college football and the confidence of someone who still believed that mattered. He shook hands too firmly. He interrupted women mid-sentence. He had a way of leaning back in his chair at the dinner table that communicated, without a single word, that he considered everything around him, the food, the furniture, the conversation, the people, to be his. He was not cruel in the way that makes a good villain. He was worse than that. He was cruel in the way that is so ordinary, so embedded in the daily texture of domestic life, that no one standing outside the house would ever see it. He never raised his hand. He never raised his voice above the particular volume that men use when they want to sound reasonable while saying something monstrous. He simply occupied space. Physical, emotional, financial. The way water fills a container, pressing against every wall until there was no room for anyone else. And when Evelyn moved into the Ashford house 18 months ago, Derek made it very clear, in the language of chair placement and dinner portions and thermostat settings, that the container was already full. It had started with the room. After James died, Evelyn stayed in the family home for a year and a half. It was a modest brick ranch in the Dilworth neighborhood, 3 bedrooms, a garden out back that she tended with the seriousness of a surgeon. She was fine. She was more than fine. She had her routines, her friends at Mount Zion Baptist, her Thursday morning walk with Lorraine from 2 doors down, her standing appointment at the library, where she volunteered in the children's section because she liked the way a 5-year-old's face looked when they turned a page and found a dragon. But Nicole had decided. "Mom, this doesn't make sense anymore," Nicole had said on one of her Saturday visits. The visits that had become shorter and more purposeful once the estate was settled, as if Nicole was checking items off a list that included mother somewhere between dry cleaning and oil change. "You're alone in this house. What if you fall? What if something happens in the middle of the night?" "I have a phone," Evelyn said. "I have neighbors. You have a 3-bedroom house you can't maintain." "The house is maintained." "Mom." Nicole used the tone. The tone was something Nicole had perfected, half patience, half pity, designed to make the person on the receiving end feel as though they were being unreasonable for wanting to continue existing on their own terms. Derek and I talked about it. We have the guest suite downstairs. You'd have your own bathroom. You'd be close to the kids. It's the responsible thing to do. The responsible thing. Evelyn noted the phrase. Not the kind thing. Not the loving thing. The responsible thing. As if Evelyn were a compliance issue. I'll think about it, Evelyn said. Don't think too long. We need to list this house before the market turns. There it was. The house. The 3-bedroom brick ranch in Dilworth that James had paid off 17 years ago. The house that, according to a recent appraisal Evelyn had quietly obtained, was worth $420,000. Nicole had been thinking about the house. Evelyn had noticed. She moved in on a Sunday in March. Derek carried her suitcases, 2 of them because Nicole had explained, with that particular tone again, that the guest suite didn't have room for all of that, and suggested Evelyn put the rest in storage. All of that was 43 years of a life. Photo albums. James's tools. The quilt her grandmother had sewn. The cedar chest that smelled like the church where she was married. Evelyn did not argue. She packed 2 suitcases and 1 box of things she would not explain to Nicole, a leather portfolio, a set of keys that did not belong to any lock in Nicole's house, and a phone number written on a yellow post-it note in James's careful handwriting. The guest suite was not what Nicole had described. It was technically a room. It was below ground level, at the back of the finished basement, past the laundry machines and the storage shelves and the treadmill that Derek used as a clothes rack. It had a window that looked out onto the side yard at ankle height. It had a bathroom with a shower stall so narrow that Evelyn had to step in sideways. The bed was a full-size mattress on a metal frame. Not the queen Nicole had mentioned. Not the room with the bay window that Evelyn had assumed when Nicole said, guest suite. The bay window room, she discovered on her first morning, was Derek's home office. He needs the space for calls, Nicole explained, not looking up from her phone. The basement is actually better for you. It's cooler in the summer. It's March, Evelyn said quietly. You'll appreciate it in July. Evelyn set her 2 suitcases on the metal bed frame. She hung her blouses in a closet that smelled of mothballs and old paint. She placed James's photo on the nightstand, a small silver frame, the 2 of them at their 40th anniversary, his arm around her waist, both of them laughing at something their granddaughter had said. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the ankle-height window. She looked at the photo of her husband. Not yet, she whispered. But soon. The rhythms of the Ashford house revealed themselves quickly. The way the pattern of a maze becomes clear when you stop running and simply stand still. Evelyn was not a guest. She was a utility. She woke at 5:30 every morning. A habit from decades of early shifts at the county planning office, where she had spent 31 years reviewing zoning permits and infrastructure proposals before retiring at 65. Nobody in her family had ever asked what she did at the planning office. They knew she worked there. They knew it was government. They assumed it was clerical, the way people assume things about women who don't correct them. By 6 she had the coffee made. By 6:30, she had packed lunches for the 2 grandchildren, Aiden, who was 14 and already taller than his mother, and Maya, who was 11 and had the particular quality of seeing things that adults had decided were invisible. By 7 she had breakfast on the table. Derek liked eggs over medium with rye toast and 3 strips of turkey bacon arranged parallel on the plate. She knew this because he had told her on her 3rd morning, in the tone of a man placing an order at a restaurant where the service had disappointed him. The eggs were hard yesterday, he said, not looking up from his phone. I apologize, Evelyn said. And the coffee was weak. I'll adjust. He looked up then, a brief flicker of surprise, as if he had expected resistance and was recalibrating. Good, he said, and went back to his phone. Nicole said nothing. Nicole was already in the car, already on her commute, already performing the particular vanishing act of a daughter who has placed her mother in a situation and then absented herself from the consequences. The house was Derek's territory during the day. He worked from home 3 days a week, installed in the bay window office that should have been Evelyn's room, the door closed, his voice carrying through the floor in the authoritative cadence of a man who was always closing a deal. On those days, Evelyn was expected to be quiet, not just courteous, silent. She had been told in the second week that her television watching carried through the vents and that Derek couldn't afford to have a client hear Judge Judy in the background. I was watching the news, Evelyn said. Whatever it was, it carries. Use headphones or wait until the evening. Evelyn did not own headphones. She did not ask for headphones. She simply turned off the television and sat in the basement room with James's photo, and a library book, and the kind of stillness that could be mistaken for emptiness by someone who did not know what they were looking at. But Evelyn was not empty. Evelyn was paying attention. The meals were the clearest map of the hierarchy. At dinner, the family sat at a 6-seat dining table that Nicole had bought at a furniture showroom in South Park. Derek sat at the head. Nicole sat at the foot. The children sat on one side. Evelyn sat on the other side in the chair closest to the kitchen, so that she could get up easily if anyone needs anything. This was not presented as an assignment. It was presented as a kindness. You're right by the kitchen, Mom. It's easier for you. Easier for her to serve. Easier for her to refill water glasses without being asked. Easier for her to clear plates before dessert, so that by the time the family was eating the brownies Evelyn had baked, Evelyn was standing at the sink with her back to them, washing the dishes from the meal she had cooked and the table she had set, listening to the conversation she was no longer part of. Derek did not thank her for the meals. He commented on them. There is a difference, and anyone who has lived in a house where the difference exists knows exactly what it feels like. The chicken was dry tonight, he would say, reaching for the salt without looking at her. Or, are we out of the good rice? This tastes like the store brand. Or once leaning back in his chair with the particular satisfaction of a man who has found his target. You know, my mother makes this dish with a completely different seasoning. I could get you her recipe. Evelyn every time said the same thing. I'll keep that in mind. She said it the way a woman says it when she has already made a note in a ledger that nobody knows she is keeping. The grandchildren were two different stories. Aiden was 14 and fully absorbed into the gravitational field of his father. He had Derek's walk, Derek's way of speaking over people, Derek's instinct for occupying the center of a room. He was not unkind to Evelyn. He was simply unaware of her, the way a teenager is unaware of wallpaper. She existed in the background of his life. She made food appear. She washed his uniform. She was a function, not a person. Maya was different. Maya was 11, small for her age, with her grandmother's eyes and a quality that Evelyn recognized immediately because she had carried it herself for 71 years, the quality of noticing. Maya noticed that her grandmother ate after everyone else. She noticed that her grandmother's chair was the one with the wobble. She noticed that when her father said we, as in we decided or we think it's best, he did not mean Evelyn. One evening in April, 3 months after Evelyn moved in, Maya came down to the basement room. She knocked first, which was something no one else in the house did. They either shouted from the top of the stairs or simply didn't come down at all. Grandma! Come in, baby. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, her socked feet dangling. She was holding a school notebook, her pencil tucked behind her ear the way James used to tuck his. Grandma, can I ask you something? You can ask me anything. Maya looked at the ankle-height window, then back at Evelyn. Why do you sleep down here? Evelyn considered the question. She considered the 11-year-old asking it. She considered the various answers available, the diplomatic answer, the evasive answer, the answer that would make Nicole feel like a good daughter and Derek feel like a generous host. She chose a different one. Because this is where they put me, she said simply. Maya's eyes widened. Not with shock, with recognition. As if she had known the answer before she asked the question and had simply needed someone to say it out loud. That's not fair, Maya whispered. No, Evelyn agreed. It's not. Can't you just tell them? Evelyn reached over and tucked a braid behind Maya's ear. There are times in life, baby girl, when telling people doesn't change anything. But showing them changes everything. You just have to wait for the right moment. How do you know when it's the right moment? Evelyn smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had already received a particular phone call, who had already opened a particular folder, who had already begun the process that would rearrange every assumption in this house like furniture moved in the night. You know, she said. Because something happens that you can't let stand. Not for yourself you can wait forever. But for the people you love there's always a line. And when someone crosses it, you know. Maya nodded solemnly, as if she understood this perfectly, which, in the way of children who have been watching longer than anyone realizes, she probably did. Grandma. Yes, baby. I like it better when you sit at the table, not in the kitchen. Evelyn pulled Maya into a hug that lasted longer than she intended, because the child had said in 12 words what nobody else in the house had thought to notice. The weeks accumulated the way they do in houses where cruelty has become routine, not in dramatic episodes but in the daily texture of being diminished, one small decision at a time. Derek controlled the thermostat. He kept the house at 68 degrees, which was comfortable on the main floor but meant the basement was 62, sometimes 60, and Evelyn slept under 3 blankets and woke with stiff joints that took an hour to loosen. Can we adjust the temperature? She asked once in May, standing in the kitchen where she had just finished preparing Derek's breakfast. The thermostat is set for efficiency, Derek said, not looking up from his tablet. It's a smart system. You can't just change it. I wasn't suggesting changing it permanently. The basement runs cold. Get a space heater. Just don't run it when the AC is on. It'll spike the electric bill. Evelyn did not get a space heater. She added a 4th blanket and said nothing. Nicole, when Evelyn mentioned the cold in a conversation she'd initiated carefully, on a Saturday afternoon when Derek was at a roofing expo, responded with the tone. Mom, Derek manages the house systems. He knows what he's doing. You can't just override it because you're chilly. I'm not chilly, Nicole. I'm cold. There's a difference. There are extra blankets in the linen closet. I have 4 blankets. Then you should be fine. Nicole went back to her laptop. The conversation was over. It had been over before it started, because Nicole had long ago decided that Derek's management of the house was more important than her mother's comfort, and that this decision was reasonable, and that the word reasonable could be used to justify anything as long as you said it in the right tone. Evelyn went back to the basement. She sat on the metal bed frame. She picked up her phone. She did not call Nicole. She did not call the thermostat company. She called the number on the yellow post-it note. Margaret, she said when the line connected. It's Evelyn. I need you to pull the file on the Ashford property. The one on Selwyn Avenue. Yes, that one. I'd like to review the terms of the trust. She listened for a moment. Then she said, No, I'm not ready yet. I just want to see it. I want to remember exactly what I own. It is important at this point to understand what Evelyn Monroe owned, because the family, Nicole, Derek, even the grandchildren, had constructed a version of Evelyn that was convenient to them. In their version, she was a retired government clerk who had lived modestly, been married to a mid-level contractor, and had been left, after James's death, with a small pension, Social Security, and the proceeds from the Dilworth house, most of which had presumably gone toward her care. A word Derek used often, as if housing his mother-in-law in a basement was an act of philanthropy. This version was incorrect. Evelyn Monroe had spent 31 years at the Mecklenburg County Planning and Zoning Office. She had started as a permit clerk. She had ended as the Deputy Director of Long-Range Planning, overseeing infrastructure development for one of the fastest-growing counties in the Southeast. She had reviewed, approved, and in some cases redesigned the zoning frameworks for 17 major residential developments, for commercial corridors, and the transit-oriented development plan that had doubled property values along the Blue Line. She understood real estate the way a cardiologist understands the heart, not as a consumer, not as a hobbyist, but as someone who had spent 3 decades watching the blood flow through the system and who knew before anyone else where the next blockage would form and where the next opportunity would open. James had known this. James, who was a general contractor by trade but a quiet investor by instinct, had relied on Evelyn's knowledge the way a ship relies on its navigator. Together, over 40 years, they had assembled a portfolio that existed entirely beneath the surface of their modest life. An LLC called Cornerstone Properties, managed by an attorney named Margaret Osei, which held title to 11 residential properties in the Charlotte metropolitan area, including 3 in the Noda Arts District purchased in 2004 when the neighborhood was still considered undesirable, and now worth, collectively, more than anyone in the Ashford household could imagine. The total value of the Cornerstone portfolio, as of the most recent appraisal, was $4.7 million. And one of the 11 properties, a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home on Selwyn Avenue with a finished basement and a bay window office, was the house Derek Ashford sat in every morning, eating eggs he hadn't cooked at a table he hadn't bought in a home he didn't own. He paid his mortgage to a bank. The bank serviced the loan. The loan was held by a trust. The trust was administered by Margaret Osei. The trust was funded by Cornerstone Properties. Cornerstone Properties was owned by Evelyn Monroe. Derek Ashford had lived in Evelyn's house for 9 years. He had never once checked the title. Evelyn had not planned to reveal any of this. The arrangement had been James's idea, executed with the quiet precision that defined everything he did. When Nicole and Derek had been looking for a house in 2015, struggling with Derek's credit history, a detail Nicole had mentioned once and never again, James had quietly purchased the Selwyn Avenue property through the LLC and structured the mortgage so that Derek and Nicole would make payments they believed went to a conventional lender. The interest rate was below market. The terms were generous. It was, in every way, a gift disguised as a transaction, because James understood that Derek was the kind of man who would accept a below-market mortgage but would never accept a gift from his father-in-law. "He's got too much pride for charity," James had told Evelyn, "but not enough sense to check the paperwork. And if they find out? They won't find out unless someone tells them. And nobody's going to tell them unless there's a reason." James had said this in the way of a man who was already imagining the reason, who had already seen in Derek's particular brand of casual dominance, the outline of a future that might require exactly this kind of leverage. But James had died before the reason arrived, so the reason had come to Evelyn instead. And Evelyn, who had spent 31 years reading zoning maps and infrastructure plans and the particular language of legal documents that most people sign without reading, was more than equipped to handle it. She was simply waiting. She was waiting for Derek to cross the line. She didn't know yet what the line would look like. She didn't know it would happen at a Sunday dinner, in front of the children in the house she owned, at the table she had set, after a meal she had cooked for a man who had never once said thank you. But she knew it was coming. And she was ready. The Sunday dinner happened in September, 7 months after Evelyn moved in. It was one of those early autumn evenings in Charlotte when the heat breaks just enough to open the windows, when the light turns amber at 6 o'clock and the neighborhood smells of someone's grill. Evelyn had spent the afternoon cooking. A full spread, the way she and James used to do on Sundays. Roasted chicken with rosemary, garlic, mashed potatoes, collard greens with smoked turkey, cornbread from scratch, and a sweet potato pie cooling on the counter. She had set the table with Nicole's good plates, the white ones with the gold rim that came out for guests. She had folded the napkins. She had placed a small vase of zinnias from the neighbor's garden in the center of the table, because the neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had offered them over the fence that morning and Evelyn had accepted them with the warmth she extended to everyone who was not related to her by marriage. The family sat down. Derek at the head, Nicole at the foot, the children on one side, Evelyn in the kitchen chair. The meal began the way meals in the Ashford house always began, with Derek serving himself first, then the children, then Nicole. Evelyn served herself last, from whatever remained, which was always enough but never the best portion. She had stopped noticing this. Or rather, she had stopped letting it register as anything other than data. Another entry in the ledger she was keeping in the part of her mind that Derek had never thought to look. The conversation was about Thanksgiving. "I think we should do it at the lake house this year," Derek said, cutting into the chicken with the confidence of a man carving something he had killed himself. "My parents are coming in from Raleigh. My sister's bringing her family. We can rent the big cabin on Lake Norman." "That sounds wonderful," Nicole said. "The kids would love the water." "It's going to be about 20 people," Derek continued. "I'll handle the booking. Nicole, you handle the menu with my mom. She wants to do the turkey." I told her that was fine. Evelyn, who had cooked every Thanksgiving meal for 43 years, who had once prepared a 22-pound turkey with cornbread dressing, giblet gravy, and 7 side dishes for 31 people at the Mount Zion Fellowship Hall, continued eating her collard greens. "What about Grandma?" Maya asked. The table went quiet for exactly 1.5 seconds. It was the kind of pause that means everyone heard the question and no one wants to answer it. "What about her, sweetie?" Nicole said, the brightness in her voice just slightly too bright. "Is Grandma coming to the lake house?" It is important at this point to understand what Evelyn Monroe owned, because the family, Nicole, Derek, even the grandchildren, had constructed a version of Evelyn that was convenient to them. In their version, she was a retired government clerk who had lived modestly, been married to a mid-level contractor, and had been left after James's death with a small pension, Social Security, and the proceeds from the Dilworth house, most of which had presumably gone toward her care, a word Derek used often, as if housing his mother-in-law in a basement was an act of philanthropy. This version was incorrect. Evelyn Monroe had spent 31 years at the Mecklenburg County Planning and Zoning Office. She had started as a permit clerk. She had ended as the Deputy Director of Long-Range Planning, overseeing infrastructure development for one of the fastest-growing counties in the Southeast. She had reviewed, approved, and in some cases redesigned the zoning frameworks for 17 major residential developments, for commercial corridors, and the transit-oriented development plan that had doubled property values along the Blue Line. She understood real estate the way a cardiologist understands the heart, not as a consumer, not as a hobbyist, but as someone who had spent 3 decades watching the blood flow through the system and who knew before anyone else where the next blockage would form and where the next opportunity would open. James had known this. James, who was a general contractor by trade but a quiet investor by instinct, had relied on Evelyn's knowledge the way a ship relies on its navigator. Together, over 40 years, they had assembled a portfolio that existed entirely beneath the surface of their modest life. An LLC called Cornerstone Properties, managed by an attorney named Margaret Osei, which held title to 11 residential properties in the Charlotte metropolitan area, including 3 in the Noda Arts District purchased in 2004 when the neighborhood was still considered undesirable, and now worth, collectively, more than anyone in the Ashford household could imagine. The total value of the Cornerstone portfolio, as of the most recent appraisal, was $4.7 million. And one of the 11 properties, a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home on Selwyn Avenue with a finished basement and a bay window office, was the house Derek Ashford sat in every morning, eating eggs he hadn't cooked at a table he hadn't bought in a home he didn't own. He paid his mortgage to a bank. The bank serviced the loan. The loan was held by a trust. The trust was administered by Margaret Osei. The trust was funded by Cornerstone Properties. Cornerstone Properties was owned by Evelyn Monroe. Derek Ashford had lived in Evelyn's house for 9 years. He had never once checked the title. Evelyn had not planned to reveal any of this. The arrangement had been James's idea, executed with the quiet precision that defined everything he did. When Nicole and Derek had been looking for a house in 2015, struggling with Derek's credit history, a detail Nicole had mentioned once and never again, James had quietly purchased the Selwyn Avenue property through the LLC and structured the mortgage so that Derek and Nicole would make payments they believed went to a conventional lender. The interest rate was below market. The terms were generous. It was, in every way, a gift disguised as a transaction, because James understood that Derek was the kind of man who would accept a below-market mortgage but would never accept a gift from his father-in-law. "He's got too much pride for charity," James had told Evelyn, "but not enough sense to check the paperwork. And if they find out? They won't find out unless someone tells them. And nobody's going to tell them unless there's a reason." James had said this in the way of a man who was already imagining the reason, who had already seen in Derek's particular brand of casual dominance, the outline of a future that might require exactly this kind of leverage. But James had died before the reason arrived, so the reason had come to Evelyn instead. And Evelyn, who had spent 31 years reading zoning maps and infrastructure plans and the particular language of legal documents that most people sign without reading, was more than equipped to handle it. She was simply waiting. She was waiting for Derek to cross the line. She didn't know yet what the line would look like. She didn't know it would happen at a Sunday dinner, in front of the children in the house she owned, at the table she had set, after a meal she had cooked for a man who had never once said thank you. But she knew it was coming. And she was ready. The Sunday dinner happened in September, 7 months after Evelyn moved in. It was one of those early autumn evenings in Charlotte when the heat breaks just enough to open the windows, when the light turns amber at 6 o'clock and the neighborhood smells of someone's grill. Evelyn had spent the afternoon cooking. A full spread, the way she and James used to do on Sundays. Roasted chicken with rosemary, garlic, mashed potatoes, collard greens with smoked turkey, cornbread from scratch, and a sweet potato pie cooling on the counter. She had set the table with Nicole's good plates, the white ones with the gold rim that came out for guests. She had folded the napkins. She had placed a small vase of zinnias from the neighbor's garden in the center of the table, because the neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had offered them over the fence that morning, and Evelyn had accepted them with the warmth she extended to everyone who was not related to her by marriage. The family sat down. Derek at the head, Nicole at the foot, the children on one side, Evelyn in the kitchen chair. The meal began the way meals in the Ashford house always began, with Derek serving himself first, then the children, then Nicole. Evelyn served herself last from whatever remained, which was always enough but never the best portion. She had stopped noticing this. Or rather, she had stopped letting it register as anything other than data. Another entry in the ledger she was keeping in the part of her mind that Derek had never thought to look. The conversation was about Thanksgiving. "I think we should do it at the lake house this year," Derek said, cutting into the chicken with the confidence of a man carving something he had killed himself. "My parents are coming in from Raleigh. My sister's bringing her family. We can rent the big cabin on Lake Norman." "That sounds wonderful," Nicole said. "The kids would love the water." "It's going to be about 20 people," Derek continued. "I'll handle the booking. Nicole, you handle the menu with my mom. She wants to do the turkey." I told her that was fine. Evelyn, who had cooked every Thanksgiving meal for 43 years, who had once prepared a 22-pound turkey with cornbread dressing, giblet gravy, and 7 side dishes for 31 people at the Mount Zion Fellowship Hall, continued eating her collard greens. "What about Grandma?" Maya asked. The table went quiet for exactly 1.5 seconds. It was the kind of pause that means everyone heard the question and no one wants to answer it. "What about her, sweetie?" Nicole said, the brightness in her voice just slightly too bright. "Is Grandma coming to the lake house?" Derek set down his fork. He looked at Evelyn with the particular expression he used when addressing a logistical problem. Not hostile, not warm, simply calculating. "The cabin sleeps 18, he said. "With my parents and my sister's family, we're already tight. Evelyn, you'd probably be more comfortable here. You don't do well in crowds anyway." Evelyn looked at him. "I do fine in crowds. I'm just saying the cabin's going to be hectic. Kids running around the boat, my dad's a handful after a couple of drinks. It might be better for everyone if I stay home. If you're comfortable here, we'll bring you a plate." A plate. He would bring her a plate. From the Thanksgiving dinner that would be held without her, cooked by his mother, in a cabin she could have paid for 7 times over. "That's fine," Evelyn said. The words tasted like nothing. "See," Derek said to Nicole, picking up his fork again. "She's fine with it." Maya was staring at her plate. Her jaw was tight. She was 11 years old and she was learning something about the world that no parent should teach and no grandchild should have to witness. "I want Grandma to come," Maya said. "Maya," Nicole said. "We discussed this." "You discussed it. Nobody asked me. Nobody asked Grandma." "Maya." Derek's voice dropped half a register. The warning tone. "We're having a family conversation. When you're older, you'll understand how these things work. She is family." "That's enough." Maya pushed her chair back from the table. She looked at Evelyn with eyes that were swimming but refusing to spill. Then she walked upstairs without another word. The silence she left behind was enormous. Evelyn folded her napkin. She placed it beside her plate. She had made a decision, not in this moment but long before it, and this moment had simply confirmed it. She stood up and began to clear the dishes. Derek watched her go to the kitchen. He leaned back in his chair, the one that said everything around him was his, and he said the words that ended his tenancy, his marriage, and his particular brand of comfortable cruelty, all in a single sentence he would spend years wishing he could take back. "Evelyn, I know this is an adjustment, but let's be clear about something. You have no rights in this house. You're here because Nicole and I allow it. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone." Evelyn was standing at the sink. Her back was to him. Her hands were in the warm water. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and sweet potato pie. She did not turn around. She did not raise her voice. She said, "I understand." And then she dried her hands on the dish towel, walked down to the basement, sat on the metal bed frame and picked up her phone. She dialed the number on the yellow post-it note. "Margaret," she said. It's time. Margaret O'Say answered on the second ring. She always did when Evelyn called. Not because Evelyn called often. In the 3 years since James's death, they had spoken perhaps a dozen times, brief and precise, the way two people communicate when they share a language built on documents and decimal points, and the particular trust that forms between a woman and the attorney who has held her secrets for 26 years. Margaret was 63, a corporate real estate attorney with a practice in uptown Charlotte that occupied the 14th floor of a building Evelyn's LLC had once considered purchasing. She was the kind of lawyer who wore her reading glasses on a gold chain and never raised her voice because she had never needed to. She had handled the formation of Cornerstone Properties in 1998. She had drafted the trust that held the Selwyn Avenue mortgage. She had structured every acquisition, every lease, every transfer with the quiet, airtight precision of someone who understood that the most powerful documents in the world are the ones nobody knows exist. It's time, Evelyn said. Margaret did not ask what Evelyn meant. She did not ask for context. She did not ask if Evelyn was sure. She had been waiting for this call the way a surgeon waits for the page, not hoping for it but prepared. Tell me what you need, Margaret said. I need 3 things. First, I want a full accounting of the Selwyn Avenue Trust, every payment received, every term, the current balance, and the acceleration clause. Second, I want the title pulled and certified. I want it clean, notarized, and ready to present. Third, I need you to draft a 60-day notice. A 60-day notice to vacate? No, not yet. A 60-day notice of ownership disclosure. I want them to know who holds the deed before I decide what to do with it. I want them to sit with that information. There was a pause on the line. Not hesitation, admiration. Evelyn, James always said you were the patient one. James was right about most things. When do you want the documents? I want them in my hands within the week. But Margaret, I don't want them served. I want to deliver them myself. In person. At the right moment. And when will you know the right moment? Evelyn looked at the ankle-height window. Outside, she could hear Derek laughing at something on the television, the sound traveling through the vents the same way her news program apparently did, except no one had ever asked Derek to use headphones. I'll know, she said. I always know. She hung up the phone. She placed it on the nightstand beside James's photo. She looked at his face, the half-smile, the crinkled eyes, the quiet confidence of a man who had built a fortune and hidden it inside a life so modest that his own daughter had never thought to look. You knew this would happen, she whispered. You knew exactly who he was. James smiled back from the silver frame, saying nothing, the way he always had when Evelyn was right and he wanted her to know it without interrupting. The week that followed was, to anyone watching from the outside, entirely ordinary. Evelyn cooked breakfast. She packed lunches. She cleaned the kitchen, ran the vacuum on the main floor while Derek was on his calls, folded laundry, and prepared dinner. She moved through the house the way she always had, quietly, efficiently, with the particular invisibility that the family had come to depend on without ever naming it. But beneath the surface, Evelyn was conducting an operation. On Monday, she walked to the public library, a 40-minute walk each way that she told Nicole was for exercise, and used the computer terminal to access her private email account, the one she had created 7 years ago at James's suggestion and had never shared with anyone except Margaret. In her inbox were 3 messages from Margaret's paralegal, scanned copies of the trust documents, the certified title, and a draft of the ownership disclosure notice. She read every word. She read them the way she had read zoning applications for 31 years, not for what they said but for what they meant, for the doors they opened and the doors they closed, for the precise location of every lever and every lock. The title was clean. The trust was current. Derek and Nicole's mortgage payments, $2,340 per month for 9 years, had been received, recorded, and deposited into the Cornerstone operating account without a single missed payment. They had never been late. They had also never been curious. Not once in 9 years had either of them requested a copy of the deed, questioned the terms of the loan, or asked the name of the entity that held their mortgage. They had simply paid the way people pay for things they assume are theirs. On Tuesday, Evelyn made a second call. Raymond, she said when the line connected. This is Evelyn Monroe. I need a favor. Raymond Cole was a retired home inspector who had worked with James for 20 years. He was 74, built like a fire hydrant, with hands the size of dinner plates and a memory for property details that bordered on photographic. He had inspected the Selwyn Avenue house before the purchase in 2015. He knew every pipe, every joist, every square foot of that foundation. "Mrs. Monroe," Raymond said, his voice carrying the warm, church bass rumble she remembered. "It's been too long. What can I do for you?" "I need a current condition report on the Selwyn Avenue property. Not a formal inspection, just your eyes. I want to know the state of the house. Maintenance, modifications, anything that's changed since the original purchase." "You want me to come out there?" "I want you to come out here as a friend. You're visiting me. You're having coffee. You just happen to notice a few things while you're in the house." Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he chuckled, the low, knowing laugh of a man who had worked with James Monroe long enough to recognize the particular chess game the Monroe family played. "Coffee sounds good," he said. "How's Thursday?" Raymond arrived on Thursday morning at 10, after Derek had left for a client meeting and Nicole was at her office downtown. He pulled up in his battered pickup truck, the same one he'd driven for 15 years, and rang the doorbell with the unhurried patience of a man who had nowhere else to be and all the time in the world to be useful. Evelyn met him at the door with coffee and a plate of shortbread cookies she had baked that morning. They sat in the kitchen and Raymond looked around the way inspectors look at houses, not at the decor, not at the furnishings, but at the bones. The joints. The places where a house tells the truth that its owners never would. "How's the basement?" he asked casually, stirring his coffee. "Cold. The HVAC doesn't reach properly. The ductwork was modified at some point. I can hear where the flow changes." Raymond nodded. "James had that system balanced when we did the initial walkthrough. If someone rerouted the ducts to prioritize the main floor, the basement would lose about 30% of its airflow. Someone did. The water heater? Takes 12 minutes to get hot water in the basement shower." Raymond set down his coffee cup. He looked at Evelyn with the particular expression of a man who has been inside 1,000 houses and knows exactly what deferred maintenance looks like when it's applied selectively, when the rooms that matter to the owners are maintained perfectly, and the rooms that hold the people who don't matter are allowed to quietly deteriorate. "You want me to document this," he said. It wasn't a question. "I want you to write me a letter. Not a formal report. A letter from one old friend to another, describing the condition of the property as you observe it during a social visit. Dated and signed. And if someone asks why I wrote it? Nobody is going to ask why you wrote it, Raymond. They're going to ask why they didn't notice what you noticed." Raymond finished his coffee. He spent the next 90 minutes walking the house with the practiced casualness of a man admiring crown molding and checking cabinet hardware while cataloging, with surgical precision, every modification that had been made to the HVAC system, every patch of neglected grout in the basement bathroom, every instance where the property had been maintained for the comfort of the main floor occupants at the expense of the lower level. When he left, he shook Evelyn's hand at the door. "James would be proud of you," he said. "James would have done this faster," Evelyn said. "James wouldn't have had the patience to wait this long. That's why you were the better half." On Friday, the manila envelope arrived. Margaret had sent it by courier, not to the Ashford house, but to the Mount Zion Baptist Church office, where Evelyn's friend Patricia, the church secretary, received it without comment and held it behind the front desk until Evelyn arrived for her Saturday morning volunteer shift. Evelyn sat in the church parking lot with the engine off and opened the envelope on her lap. Inside were 4 documents. The first was the certified title to 4412, Selwyn Avenue, Charlotte, North Carolina, showing Cornerstone Properties LLC as the owner of record, with Evelyn Grace Monroe listed as the sole managing member. The second was the trust summary, a complete ledger of every mortgage payment Derek and Nicole had made, totaling $252,720 over 9 years, applied to a principal of $310,000 at 3.2% interest. The remaining balance was $87,400. The third was Raymond's letter, handwritten on his personal stationery, describing in specific professional detail the condition of the property, including the modified HVAC system, the deteriorating basement bathroom, and 3 instances of deferred maintenance that, in Raymond's professional opinion, constituted a reduction in property value of approximately $18,000. The fourth was the ownership disclosure notice, drafted by Margaret, printed on Cornerstone Properties letterhead, addressed to Derek and Nicole Ashford, informing them that the property they occupied at 4412 Selwyn Avenue was owned by an entity controlled by Evelyn Monroe, that their mortgage was held by a trust administered on her behalf, and that a meeting to discuss the terms of their continued occupancy was being requested within 30 days. Evelyn read each document twice. She placed them back in the envelope. She placed the envelope inside her leather portfolio, the one she had brought from the Dilworth house, the one that had sat on the nightstand in the basement room for 7 months, the one nobody had ever asked about because nobody had ever thought to wonder what a 71-year-old woman in a basement room might be carrying. She drove back to the Ashford house. She parked the Honda Accord in the driveway behind Derek's Tahoe. She walked inside. She made lunch. She folded laundry. She said nothing. The envelope sat in the leather portfolio on the nightstand, beside James's photo, patient as a heartbeat. The right moment arrived 3 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon in October. Nicole had organized a gathering, just a few people, she had told Evelyn, which turned out to be 16 adults and 9 children, including Derek's parents from Raleigh, his sister Brenda and her husband, 2 couples from the neighborhood, and Nicole's boss from the agency with her husband. It was the kind of event that required a full day of preparation, and the full day of preparation was performed almost entirely by Evelyn. She had been informed of the gathering on Wednesday. Not invited, informed. Nicole had left a typed list on the kitchen counter with the menu, the timeline, and a note at the bottom that said, "Mom, can you handle the appetizers and sides? I'll order the main from the caterer. Derek's mom is bringing dessert." Evelyn handled the appetizers and sides. She made deviled eggs for a dozen. She made a 7-layer dip that required 3 separate preparation stages. She made bruschetta with heirloom tomatoes she had walked to the farmer's market to buy. She made collard green spring rolls, which were her own recipe, the one James used to request at every gathering, the one that made people close their eyes when they took the first bite. She made all of this in a kitchen that was not hers, for a party she had not been invited to plan, in a house she owned, and she placed every dish on a table she had covered with a cloth she had ironed that morning at 6 a.m. while the rest of the house slept. By 2 o'clock, the guests had arrived. The house was full of the specific noise of a suburban Saturday gathering. Ice clinking, children chasing each other through the hallway, the low competitive hum of men discussing football near the grill, the higher, more careful frequency of women complimenting each other's outfits in the living room. Derek was in his element. He stood at the center of the patio with a beer in one hand and a pair of tongs in the other, performing the role of host with the ease of a man who had never questioned his right to occupy the center of any room, any conversation, any house. His mother, Diane Ashford, was a sharp-featured woman in her early 70s who wore her pearls the way some women wear armor. She had arrived that morning, kissed Nicole on both cheeks, handed Derek a bottle of bourbon, and looked at Evelyn with a particular expression reserved for service staff whose name one has been told but cannot be expected to remember. "Evelyn," Diane said, setting her purse on the kitchen counter, the counter Evelyn had just wiped. "The house looks wonderful. Nicole has done such a lovely job." "Thank you," Evelyn said, because there was nothing else to say, and because correcting a woman like Diane Ashford was like correcting a weather pattern, technically possible but ultimately futile. Evelyn moved through the gathering the way she always moved, refilling, clearing, offering, disappearing. She brought out trays. She collected empty glasses. She directed a child to the bathroom. She wiped a spill on the patio that no one else had noticed. She existed in the margins of her own home, a ghost with a dish towel. At 4:15, the conversation at the patio table turned to real estate. Derek's friend Craig, a mortgage broker who lived 3 streets over, was talking about the market, interest rates, property values, the particular self-congratulatory tone of men who had bought houses at the right time and believed this made them intelligent. "We're sitting on a gold mine out here," Craig said, leaning back in his chair. "This neighborhood has appreciated 40% in 5 years. Derek, what did you guys pay for this place?" "310, Derek said, the number landing with the weight of a man who believed he had made the deal of a lifetime. "Fixed rate 3.2. Our lender was practically giving it away." "Who's your lender?" "Some trust. Nicole handles the paperwork. I just write the check." He laughed. The men laughed. It was the laugh of people who believe that not knowing the details of their own financial arrangements is a sign of success rather than negligence. Evelyn was standing just inside the patio door, holding a tray of bruschetta. She heard every word. She made no expression. She set the tray on the table, refilled Craig's wife's water glass, and returned to the kitchen. But Maya, who was sitting on the porch swing with a book, had been watching her grandmother's face. And Maya, who was 11 and understood things that the adults in her life had decided were too complicated for children, saw something in Evelyn's expression that she had never seen before. It wasn't hurt. It wasn't anger. It was readiness. If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Linda's Life Diaries. The best ones are still coming. And the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. The moment came at 4:40. The gathering was winding down to its comfortable center, the part of the afternoon where the food had settled and the conversation had loosened and the guests were relaxed enough to say things they wouldn't say at the beginning. Derek was telling a story. He was always telling a story, the kind of story that began with "I," and ended with a laugh that required the audience to confirm that Derek was right or smart or generous or all three. This particular story was about the house. So when we moved in, Derek was saying, his voice carrying across the patio with the confidence of a man performing for a crowd, the basement was basically a concrete box. I mean, nothing down there. I finished it myself, framed it out, ran the electrical, put in the bathroom. Took me 3 months of weekends. This was not true. James and Raymond had finished the basement before the sale. Derek had added a coat of paint and a ceiling fan. Now we've got my mother-in-law down there, Derek continued, and the tone shifted, not to cruelty exactly, but to the particular register men use when they are about to say something at someone else's expense and want the audience to understand it as humor. She's got her own little apartment, her own bathroom, her own TV. When she remembers to use the headphones. Few polite laughs. Diane Ashford smiled the way a woman smiles when she agrees with her son but knows better than to say so out loud. It's a lot, I'll be honest, Derek said, lowering his voice to the confessional tone, the one that invites sympathy. Having someone else in the house, especially someone from a different generation, different habits, different expectations. But Nicole wanted to do the right thing and I support that. This is our home. We opened our doors. That's what family does. Evelyn was in the kitchen slicing sweet potato pie. She could hear every word through the open patio door. Her hands were steady. The knife moved through the pie in clean, even sections. But I had to set boundaries, Derek said. You have to. Otherwise it's chaos. I told her straight, I said, Evelyn, this is our house. We run it our way. You're a guest here and we're happy to have you, but you need to respect the way we do things. And she understood. She's a reasonable woman. He took a sip of his beer. He looked satisfied with himself, the way a man looks when he has told a story that makes him the hero and the person he is describing the problem. Nicole, sitting across the table, did not correct him. She did not add context. She did not mention the cold basement, the wobbling chair, the Thanksgiving she had agreed to exclude her mother from. She simply nodded the way she always nodded, performing the role of the supportive wife who had made a difficult decision and was managing it gracefully. Maya had closed her book. She was standing at the edge of the patio now, her small frame framed by the doorway, her eyes fixed on her father with an expression that was far too old for 11. That's not true, Maya said. The conversation stopped. Not gradually, instantly. The way sound stops when someone drops a glass. Maya, Nicole said, her voice carrying the warning tone. Go inside. Grandma didn't want to come here. You made her. And she doesn't have her own apartment. She has a room in the basement with a window you can't even see out of. And she cooks every single meal and nobody says thank you. And you didn't finish the basement, Dad. Grandpa James did. Before you even moved in. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Pressed against the chest. It made people look at their plates, their hands, anywhere but at the 11-year-old girl who had said in 40 seconds what every person at that table had been too polite or too complicit to notice. Derek's face changed. The affable host disappeared, replaced by the man underneath. The man who controlled the thermostat and criticized the eggs and leaned back in his chair like a king on a throne he hadn't built. Maya, go to your room. Now. No. I said now. And I said no. Grandma. That is enough. Derek's voice hit the register that stops children mid-sentence. Not a shout, something worse. The voice of a man who has been embarrassed in front of people he needed to impress, and who has decided that someone will pay for it. Maya's eyes filled. She looked at Evelyn, who had appeared in the patio doorway, still holding the pie server, her face perfectly composed. Grandma, Maya whispered. Tell them. Evelyn looked at her granddaughter. She looked at the table full of guests, their faces frozen in the particular discomfort of people who have witnessed a family fracture and do not know which side of it they are standing on. She looked at Derek, whose jaw was set, whose hands were gripping the armrests of his chair, whose entire body communicated the specific rage of a man whose authority has been challenged in his own kingdom. She looked at Nicole, who was staring at the tablecloth. Maya, sweetheart, Evelyn said, her voice calm and warm and entirely without tremor. Go upstairs. Take your book. I'll come check on you in a little while. Maya hesitated. Then she nodded, the way a soldier nods when given an order they trust, and walked inside. Evelyn turned to Derek. She did not sit down. She did not raise her voice. She spoke the way a woman speaks when she has already made every decision, and is simply informing the room of the outcome. Derek, she said, I think we should have a conversation. But not here and not now. Monday morning. 10 o'clock. In the kitchen. I'll have coffee ready. Derek stared at her. We don't need a scheduled meeting in my own house, Evelyn. I think you'll find that we do. Excuse me. Monday. 10 o'clock. I'll also need Nicole to be present. And I'd suggest you both clear your morning calendars. She turned and walked back into the kitchen, leaving behind a silence so complete that the only sound was the ice melting in Craig's glass. The rest of Saturday was a controlled demolition of normalcy. The guests left early, the way guests always leave when they can feel the foundation cracking beneath the floorboards. Handshakes were briefer. Hugs were one-armed. Craig's wife said, "Lovely party," in the voice people use when they mean, "I will be discussing this in my car before I reach the end of the street." Derek's parents left with the particular stiffness of people who had been promised a pleasant afternoon and received, instead, a front-row seat to something they would rather not have witnessed. Diane Ashford kissed Derek on the cheek and whispered something Evelyn couldn't hear but could guess. Something about boundaries, about control, about the particular humiliation of being corrected by a child and then managed by a woman who was supposed to be grateful. Derek did not speak to Evelyn for the rest of the evening. He sat in the bay window office with the door closed, the light from his computer screen casting blue shadows under the door. Nicole cleaned the kitchen in silence. The first time she had cleaned the kitchen in 7 months, but this was not generosity. It was anxiety. She scrubbed the counters with the particular energy of a woman who senses that something is about to change, and does not yet know what. Evelyn went to the basement. She sat on the metal bed frame. She opened the leather portfolio. She looked at the documents, the title, the trust summary, Raymond's letter, Margaret's disclosure notice, and she added one more item. A photograph. It was a picture of her and James, standing in front of the Selwyn Avenue house on the day Cornerstone Properties closed the purchase. They were both smiling. James was holding the key. Behind them, the house was empty, freshly painted, waiting to be filled with people who would never know whose hands had built the floor beneath their feet. Evelyn placed the photograph on top of the documents. She closed the portfolio. She turned off the light. She slept well. Sunday was church. Evelyn dressed in her navy blue suit, the one she wore to board meetings, the one with the structured shoulders and the silk lining, the one that made her look like exactly what she was. A woman of substance, a woman of authority, a woman who had earned every thread. She drove herself to Mount Zion Baptist. She sat in her usual pew, third from the front left side. She sang the hymns. She listened to the sermon. She placed her tithe in the collection plate, a check, not cash, because Evelyn Monroe had been writing checks to Mount Zion for 37 years, and the church treasurer, who was also her friend, knew exactly who she was. After the service, she stood in the fellowship hall with a cup of coffee and a slice of pound cake, and she spoke to the people who knew her. The real her, not the basement version, not the dish towel version, not the version Derek had described to his friends on the patio. She spoke to Raymond, who had come with his wife. She spoke to Patricia from the church office. She spoke to Judge Helen Marshall, who had been 2 years behind her at Johnson C. Smith University and who served on the Mecklenburg County Superior Court and who called Evelyn by her maiden name, the way old friends do. "Evie, you look like a woman with a plan," Judge Marshall said, studying her over the rim of her coffee cup. "Helen, I've had a plan since 1998. Is it a good one?" "It's a James Monroe plan." Judge Marshall smiled. "Then God help whoever's on the other end of it." Evelyn drove home. She parked the Accord in the driveway. She walked inside. She changed out of her navy suit and into her house clothes. She went to the kitchen and began preparing Sunday dinner, because she had decided, deliberately, strategically, with the precise calculation of a woman who understood that the most devastating moves are the ones that look exactly like routine, that tomorrow would be the last meal she ever cooked in this house without acknowledgement. And she wanted it to be memorable. She made James's recipe, the one he loved most: braised short ribs with red wine reduction, roasted root vegetables, and buttermilk biscuits from scratch. She set the table with the good plates. She folded the napkins. She placed the zinnias in the center. And then she sat down, not in the kitchen chair, not in the wobbly chair beside the door. She sat at the head of the table. When Derek walked in and saw her there, he stopped. His mouth opened. He looked at his chair, the chair at the head, his chair, the throne, occupied by a 71-year-old woman in a cotton blouse with her hands folded on the tablecloth. "You're in my seat," he said. "Sit anywhere you like," Evelyn said. "The food is getting cold." Derek stood there for 4 full seconds. The seconds were visible, in his jaw, in his shoulders, in the particular recalculation that happens behind a man's eyes when the person he has categorized as powerless does something that does not fit the category. He sat in the side chair. The kitchen chair. Evelyn's chair. Nobody commented on it. Nicole served herself in silence. Aiden put in his earbuds. Maya looked at her grandmother, and the faintest shadow of a smile crossed her face. The smile of someone who has been promised something and is beginning to see the first edge of it arriving. The meal was extraordinary. Even Derek, who had never complimented a single dish Evelyn had prepared, ate 2 servings of the short ribs and used his biscuit to soak up the last of the reduction. He did not say thank you. Evelyn did not expect him to. She cleared the plates. She washed the dishes. She went to the basement. She set her alarm for 6 a.m. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow the coffee would be ready at 10. And so would the truth. Monday morning arrived the way justice arrives. Quietly, without fanfare, dressed in ordinary clothes. Evelyn woke at 5:30. She showered in the narrow stall, turning sideways the way she had learned to do 7 months ago, the water taking its usual 12 minutes to warm. She dressed carefully. Not the navy suit, that was for church, for Judge Marshall, for the world that already knew who she was. Today she wore what she always wore in this house. A pressed cotton blouse, dark slacks, flat shoes. She wanted to look exactly like the woman they had decided she was. The woman who cooked. The woman who cleaned. The woman who had no rights. She wanted them to be looking at that woman when the truth arrived. By 6 the coffee was brewing. She used the good beans, the ones Nicole bought from the specialty roaster in Noda, the ones that sat on the top shelf in a matte black bag with a hand-stamped label, the ones Evelyn was not technically supposed to use because they cost $14 a bag, and Derek had once said, without looking at her, "Those are for us, Evelyn. There's Folgers in the pantry." Today, Evelyn used the good beans. She set the kitchen table for 3. Not the dining room, the kitchen. The small round table where Nicole ate her yogurt in the mornings, where Maya did her homework after school, where Evelyn sat alone at 7 a.m. with a cup of Folgers and the silence of a woman whose day had already been choreographed by someone else. She placed the leather portfolio on the table, unopened, beside the 3rd coffee cup. She waited. Nicole came downstairs first at 8:15. She was dressed for work, silk blouse, tailored pants, the gold earrings Derek had given her for their 10th anniversary. She stopped when she saw the table set for 3, the good coffee steaming in a glass carafe, the leather portfolio sitting where a placemat should have been. "What's this?" Nicole asked. Her voice carried the faintest edge of the tone, the one that meant she was already deciding this was unnecessary, and wanted Evelyn to know it before anyone sat down. "Coffee," Evelyn said. "Sit down, Nicole." "Mom, I have a 9:30 meeting. Whatever this is, can it wait?" "It cannot." Something in Evelyn's voice, not its volume which was the same as always, but its texture, its weight, the particular density of a sentence spoken by a woman who has stopped asking, made Nicole pull out a chair and sit down. Derek appeared at 8:40. He was wearing a company polo and khakis, his phone in one hand, his Yeti tumbler in the other. He looked at the table, at Nicole sitting stiffly with her hands around a coffee cup she hadn't sipped, at Evelyn standing by the counter with her arms at her sides. "What's going on?" he asked, in the tone of a man who has walked into a meeting he didn't schedule and intends to leave early. "Sit down, Derek. I've got calls at." "Sit down." He sat. Not because she had authority in his mind, she did not. He sat because there was something in the room that hadn't been there before, something atmospheric, the way the air changes before a storm when the pressure drops and the birds stop singing and the trees hold their breath. Evelyn poured coffee for all three of them. She sat in the third chair. She placed her hands on the leather portfolio. "I want to start," she said, "by telling you both that I love you." Nicole blinked. Derek shifted in his seat. This was not what either of them had expected. "I love you, Nicole, because you are my daughter and because I see your father in you every single day. His stubbornness, his intelligence, his ability to commit to a decision without looking back. Those are powerful traits. They are also dangerous ones, when they are aimed in the wrong direction." Nicole's mouth opened. Evelyn continued before she could speak. "And Derek, I want you to know that I have never hated you. I have been disappointed by you. I have been hurt by you. I have watched you treat the woman who raised your wife, who cooks your meals, who cares for your children, with a casualness that borders on contempt. But I have never hated you. I want you to hear that before you see what's in this folder." Derek leaned forward. "Evelyn, I don't know what you think. I'm not finished." The words landed like a door closing. Derek sat back. Evelyn opened the portfolio. She removed the first document and placed it face up on the table, turning it so Derek and Nicole could read it. "This," she said, "is the certified title to 4412 Selwyn Avenue, the property you live in, the property you have lived in for 9 years." Derek glanced at the document. He saw the address. He saw the legal description. He saw the name of the holding entity, Cornerstone Properties LLC. "Okay," he said slowly. "That's the trust that holds our mortgage. What about it? Read the managing member line." Derek's eyes moved down the page. Nicole leaned in. They read the line at the same time. Managing member, Evelyn Grace Monroe. The kitchen went very, very still. There are moments in a family's life when the entire architecture of the household, who speaks first, who sits where, who holds the authority and who holds the dish towel, collapses in a single instant. Not because someone has shouted, not because someone has thrown something, but because a piece of paper has been placed on a table, and the piece of paper says something that cannot be unsaid, and the people reading it realize that the ground they have been standing on belongs to someone they thought was standing on theirs. Derek stared at the document. He stared at it the way a man stares at a diagnosis he did not expect, not with comprehension, not yet, but with the particular blankness that precedes comprehension, the moment before the mind catches up to the eyes. "That's not possible," he said. Evelyn removed the second document. The trust summary. "This is the complete record of every mortgage payment you and Nicole have made over the past 9 years. $2,340 per month. $252,720 total. Every payment was received by the trust, administered by my attorney, Margaret Osei, and deposited into the operating account of Cornerstone Properties, which I own." "You," Nicole's voice cracked. "You own the trust?" "I own the trust. I own this house. I have owned this house since 2015, when your father and I purchased it through our LLC because your credit, Derek, was insufficient to secure a conventional mortgage at a reasonable rate. James structured the loan so that you would never know. He wanted you to have the dignity of believing you had earned this on your own." Derek's face had gone the color of old concrete. His hands were flat on the table, pressed hard, as if he were trying to hold himself to the surface of a world that had just tilted. "James did this," he said. "James bought our house. James and I bought 11 properties in the Charlotte area over a 40-year period. This was one of them. Your mortgage rate, 3.2%, was below market by nearly a full point. The down payment assistance you believed came from a first-time buyer program was funded by Cornerstone. The closing costs you thought were waived by the lender were absorbed by the trust. Every advantage you have enjoyed in this house was provided by the two people you decided had nothing to offer. Evelyn removed the third document. Raymond's letter. This is a condition report prepared by Raymond Cole, a licensed home inspector and longtime associate of your father-in-law. It details the current state of the property, including modifications made to the HVAC system that redirected airflow away from the basement where you housed me, resulting in a 30% reduction in heating and cooling to the lower level. It also documents deferred maintenance in the basement bathroom and 3 code-adjacent issues that have reduced the property's estimated value by approximately $18,000. She placed the letter beside the trust summary. The 3 documents formed a line on the kitchen table, a paper trail that ran from ownership to payment to neglect, each one building on the last, each one tightening the silence in the room by another degree. Nicole was crying. Not the dramatic, gasping tears of someone performing grief, the silent, leaking tears of someone who has just been shown a mirror and cannot look away from what it reflects. "Mom," she whispered. "Why didn't you tell us?" Evelyn looked at her daughter. She looked at the woman she had raised, the woman she had fed and clothed and driven to school and helped with homework and applauded at graduations and held at the altar when she married this man. She looked at the woman who had moved her to a basement and handed her a dish towel and called it the responsible thing. "Because your father wanted to see if you would treat me the same way whether you knew or not. He believed that character is what you do when you think no one is watching and no one is keeping score. He wanted to believe that you and Derek would treat me with dignity because I am your mother, not because I am your landlord." She paused. The pause filled the kitchen like water rising. He was wrong. And so was I, for waiting this long to find out. Derek stood up. The chair scraped against the tile with a sound like a bone breaking. "This is..." He ran his hand over his face. "This is insane. You're telling me I've been paying rent to my mother-in-law for 9 years. You've been paying a mortgage. To a trust. That I control. Yes. And you just sat down here in the basement and said nothing? You let me..." He stopped. The sentence he was about to finish, "Let me treat you like that," arrived at the edge of his mouth and he swallowed it, because finishing it would require admitting what he had done, and admitting what he had done would require becoming a different kind of man than the one he had been for the past 9 years, and that transformation was not something Derek Ashford could perform in a kitchen on a Monday morning. "You let me believe this was my house," he said instead. "It is your house, Derek. You live here. You've made payments. You've raised your children here. No one is disputing that. But ownership is a fact, not a feeling. And the fact is that this house, every wall, every floor, every square foot of the basement you put me in belongs to me." Evelyn removed the 4th document. The ownership disclosure notice. She placed it on the table with the care of a woman setting down a final card. "This is a formal notice of ownership disclosure, prepared by my attorney. It informs you of the ownership structure of this property, and requests a meeting within 30 days to discuss the terms of your continued occupancy." Continued occupancy. Derek said the words as if they were in a foreign language. "You're threatening to evict us." "I am not threatening anything. I am informing you of facts that you should have known 9 years ago, and chose not to investigate. What happens next depends entirely on what happens in this room, in this conversation, in the next 5 minutes. And what do you want?" Evelyn looked at him. She looked at this man, this big, confident, chair-leaning, thermostat-controlling, egg-criticizing man who had told her, at his own dinner table, in front of her grandchildren, that she had no rights in this house. She did not raise her voice. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She spoke with the calm, measured authority of a woman who had spent 31 years making decisions about the infrastructure of a city, and who understood that the most important structures are not the ones you can see, but the ones that hold everything else up. "I want 3 things," she said. "First, I want the basement renovated. Properly. The HVAC system restored to its original configuration, the bathroom expanded to code, and the room furnished as a proper living space. Not a storage closet with a bed frame. This will be completed within 60 days at your expense. Raymond will inspect the work." Derek opened his mouth. Evelyn held up one finger. "Second, I want to be treated as a member of this family, not as a guest. not as staff, not as a burden who eats for free and should be grateful for the privilege. I will eat at the table at the same time in the same chair with the same portions. I will be included in family plans, including holidays. My granddaughter will not be punished for speaking the truth, and my grandson will be taught that the woman who cooks his meals and washes his clothes has a name and a history and a life that existed long before he was born. Third, and here Evelyn paused. She looked at Nicole. She looked at her daughter's red-rimmed eyes, at the mascara tracking down her cheeks, at the woman who had once been a girl who held her mother's hand crossing the street and who had somehow, somewhere along the way, stopped holding it. Third, I want an apology. Not for me. For Maya. That child stood up in front of your friends and told the truth about how this family treats the woman who loves her most, and she was sent to her room for it. She deserves to hear from both of you that she was right. That courage is not a punishable offense. That seeing clearly is not a crime. The kitchen was silent except for the coffee maker clicking as it powered down, and the sound of Nicole crying, and the particular absence of sound that occurs when a man's entire self-conception has been dismantled by a woman he dismissed as irrelevant. Derek looked at the documents. He looked at the title. He looked at his own mortgage payments cataloged on cornerstone letterhead. He looked at the name, Evelyn Grace Monroe, printed in clean, black type on a document that said, in the language of law and property an irrefutable fact, that the woman he had put in a basement was the woman who owned the roof over his head. He sat back down. He did not lean back in the chair. I didn't know, he said quietly. No, Evelyn agreed. You didn't. But Derek, would it have mattered? He didn't answer. He didn't answer because the honest answer was yes, it would have mattered, and the fact that it would have mattered was itself the indictment. He would have treated her differently if he had known she was wealthy. He would have given her the bay window room. He would have adjusted the thermostat. He would have said thank you for the eggs. And the fact that he needed a title deed to do those things was the ugliest truth in the room. Nicole spoke next. She had been sitting with her hands around the coffee cup for the entire conversation, her fingers white against the ceramic, her body very still. When she finally looked up, her face was stripped of the tone, the brightness, the practiced patience, the particular managerial effect she used to make decisions about other people's lives feel like favors. She looked like a woman who had just seen herself clearly for the first time. Mom, she said. I'm sorry. 2 words. They came out cracked, raw, like something that had been locked in a room for a long time and had finally broken through the door. I knew. I knew he was treating you like. I knew, and I didn't stop it. I told myself it was just his way. I told myself you were fine. I told myself the basement was fine and the chair was fine and Thanksgiving was. She couldn't finish. She pressed her hand to her mouth. You told yourself what was easy, Evelyn said. Not with cruelty, with the specific gentleness of a mother who is watching her child finally feel the weight of something she has been carrying for both of them. You told yourself what let you keep your marriage comfortable and your conscience clean. I understand that, Nicole. I'm your mother. I understand the math you did. It wasn't math. It was cowardice. Evelyn reached across the table and placed her hand over Nicole's. It was love, she said. Misdirected. Unbalanced. But love. You loved your husband and your children and the life you built. And you were afraid that standing up for me would cost you something. I understand that fear, baby. I just need you to understand what it cost me. Nicole broke. She dropped her head onto her mother's hand and sobbed, the kind of sobbing that has no performance in it, no audience, no angle. Just the raw, gutting sound of a daughter who has finally hurt herself the way her mother hurt her, and who cannot bear what she hears. Evelyn held her daughter's head. She stroked her hair. She had imagined this moment for months, had rehearsed it in the basement room, had played it out in the dark while lying under 4 blankets in a 60-degree room. She had imagined feeling satisfaction, vindication, the particular pleasure of being right when everyone else was wrong. She did not feel any of those things. She felt the heavy, aching love of a mother who has won an argument she would have given anything to lose. Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing her school uniform, the plaid skirt, the white polo, the backpack hanging from one shoulder. She had been standing there long enough to hear the end of the conversation. Her face was calm, the way a child's face is calm when the world has finally started making the kind of sense she always knew it should. She walked to her grandmother. She didn't say anything. She just slipped her hand into Evelyn's and stood there, her small fingers wrapped around her grandmother's palm, her eyes looking at the documents on the table with the quiet comprehension of someone who had always known the truth and was simply waiting for the rest of the family to catch up. Derek looked at his daughter. He looked at the hand she was holding. He looked at the 71-year-old woman he had put in a basement and told she had no rights, and he saw for the first time not a burden, not a fixture, not a problem to be managed, but the foundation. The foundation of the house. The foundation of the family. The foundation of every comfort he had taken for granted and every meal he had failed to acknowledge and every morning he had walked past without seeing the woman who made it possible. "Maya," he said. His voice was different, quieter, stripped of the performance. "I'm sorry. What you said on Saturday, you were right. About all of it." Maya looked at her father for a long time. She did not rush to forgive him. She did not throw herself into his arms. She was 11 and she had learned something about forgiveness in the past 7 months that most adults never learn, that it is not a gift you give because someone asks for it. It is a door you open when you believe the person on the other side has changed enough to walk through it without breaking anything else. "Okay," she said. Just that. The door was open. Whether he walked through it was up to him. The renovation began the following week. Derek hired a contractor, not a friend, not a discount crew, but a licensed, insured company that Raymond Cole personally vetted. The basement HVAC was restored to its original configuration. The bathroom was expanded, retiled, fitted with a proper shower and a vanity with good lighting. The window was replaced with a full-size egress window that looked out onto the garden. The metal bed frame was replaced with a queen-size bed with a memory foam mattress and a headboard that Evelyn chose herself, from a furniture store where she paid with her own credit card, which was linked to an account the family had never known existed. The work took 5 weeks. During those 5 weeks, Evelyn slept in the bay window room. Derek did not object. He moved his office equipment to the dining room without comment. He set up his laptop on the table where Evelyn had placed the documents, and every morning when he opened his computer, he looked at the surface of that table and remembered what had been laid upon it. Nicole began to change. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures or tearful declarations. She changed in the small ways that matter more. She started coming home earlier. She started asking Evelyn about her day, not with the tone, but with actual curiosity, the way you ask someone whose answer you intend to listen to. She started cooking on Wednesdays, badly at first, burning the rice and oversalting the chicken, but trying. Learning. Sitting in the kitchen with her mother the way she had when she was 12, asking questions she should have asked 20 years ago. "Mom, what did you actually do at the planning office?" Evelyn smiled. "I'll tell you over dinner. It's a long story. I've got time." "Yes," Evelyn said. "You do now." Thanksgiving was held at the Selwyn Avenue house. All of it. The full table. 22 people, because Evelyn invited her church friends and Raymond and his wife, and Patricia from the office, and Mrs. Patterson from next door who grew the zinnias. The caterer was not called. The turkey was 24 pounds. The cornbread dressing was made from Evelyn's mother's recipe. The collard green spring rolls were served on the good plates. Evelyn sat at the head of the table. Derek sat beside her. Not at the foot, beside her. He had asked where she wanted him, and she had pointed to the chair on her right, and he had pulled it out and sat down without leaning back. He carved the turkey. When he was done, he served Evelyn first. It was the first time in 7 months that Evelyn had been served first in this house. The plate was full. The portions were generous. The food was warm. "Thank you, Derek," she said. "Thank you, Evelyn," he said. And he meant it. She could tell, because she had spent 40 years reading rooms and 31 years reading documents and 7 months reading the soul of a man who had finally, under the weight of a truth he could not escape, begun the slow and difficult work of becoming someone worth sitting next to. Maya said grace. She was brief, the way children are brief when they are saying something real. "Thank you for this food. Thank you for this family. Thank you for Grandma who made all of it." Evelyn closed her eyes. She felt James beside her. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a presence, the particular warmth of a man who had planned for this moment from the other side of a lifetime and who was, wherever he was, satisfied. It has been 4 months since the Monday morning in the kitchen. Evelyn still lives in the Selwyn Avenue house. The basement is no longer a punishment, it is a proper apartment with its own thermostat, its own entrance from the garden, and a small sitting area where Maya does her homework every afternoon while Evelyn reads in the chair beside her. The leather portfolio sits on the shelf in Evelyn's closet now, behind the quilt her grandmother sewed, and the cedar chest that smells like the church where she was married. She does not need to open it. She does not need to remind anyone of what it contains. The truth once spoken does not need to be repeated. It simply exists like gravity, like the foundation of a house, like the quiet, steady presence of a woman who was always holding everything together, and who finally decided to let everyone see it. Derek is not a different man. He is a man in the process of becoming one, which is slower and harder and less cinematic than the movies suggest. He still talks too much at dinner. He still leans back in his chair sometimes, caught in the old habit, before he catches himself and sits forward. He has started mowing Mrs. Patterson's lawn on Saturdays, which is not redemption but is perhaps the first step on the road toward it. Nicole calls her mother by name now, not Mom in the automatic, reflexive way of someone fulfilling an obligation, but Mama in the way she said it when she was small, when Evelyn was the largest and most important person in her world, when the distance between them was measured in inches, not in years of polite neglect. Maya's 12 now. She is taller. She still reads on the porch swing. She still asks questions that the adults in her life are not prepared to answer. Last week, she asked Evelyn how many properties Cornerstone owns. 11, Evelyn said. Are any of them near the beach? 1. On Topsail Island. Your grandfather bought it in 2007. Maya grinned. Can we go this summer? We can go whenever we want, baby girl. It's ours. Evelyn sits on the porch in the evenings now in a rocking chair Derek bought her. Not as an apology, not as a transaction, but as a gift, wrapped clumsily in newspaper because he didn't know where Nicole kept the wrapping paper, with a card that said, in handwriting that looked like it had cost him something to produce, for Evelyn. Because this porch is yours too. She rocks in the chair. She watches the fireflies in the garden. She drinks her coffee, the good coffee from the matte black bag, because it is her kitchen and her house and her life, and she will drink whatever she pleases. She thinks about James. She thinks about the 43 years they spent building something invisible, something patient, something that only revealed itself when it needed to and not a moment before. She thinks about the man who said she had no rights in this house. She thinks about the woman who nodded and dried her hands and walked to the basement and picked up the phone. She thinks about how power does not always look like power. How it sometimes looks like a woman in a cotton blouse, standing at a kitchen sink, washing dishes in a house she built, in a life she earned, with a silence that was never weakness. It was preparation. It was patience. It was the quiet, devastating certainty of a woman who knew exactly what she owned, and who waited, with the precision of a surgeon and the grace of a saint, for the right moment to show them. The zinnias are blooming again. Evelyn waters them every morning. She has nowhere else to be, and everything she needs is right here, in the house that was always hers, at the table where she finally sits at the head, in the family that is learning slowly to see her not as a burden, not as a fixture, not as a woman with no rights, but as the foundation, the one that holds everything up. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated. And we tell those stories here.